I never imagined a single phone call could alter the way I saw the world. But on October 12th, 2014, at 9:43 p.m., my friend Daniel Wright's voice on the other end of the line did just that when he whispered, almost frantically, "You need to come to Silverton now, before it happens again." Daniel and I had studied history together at the University of Denver, and while we both loved stories, he had always been the more practical one, grounded in facts and records, not myths. Hearing panic in his voice unsettled me. He told me there was something about the San Juan Mountains that people in town refused to discuss openly, something woven into their history, yet carefully kept out of guidebooks and tourist brochures. He wouldn't say more on the phone, only repeating, "If you don't see it for yourself, you won't believe me." 3 days later, I found myself driving the Million-Dollar Highway, a stretch of road that clings to cliffs with no guardrails, the kind of place where you feel the mountains breathing down your neck. The peaks loomed so close they seemed alive, wrapped in mist, shadows shifting in ways that made me question my own perception. Silverton, Colorado, sat nestled in a narrow valley, its streets lined with weathered wooden storefronts that looked unchanged since the late 1800s mining boom. The air smelled of snow and pine, and as I parked near Green Street, I noticed how the few locals walking by glanced at me quickly, then away, as if measuring whether I belonged. That night Daniel took me to the Miners Tavern, a place that felt more like a time capsule than a bar. The walls were covered in faded photographs of miners with soot-blackened faces, their eyes hollow, their expressions unreadable. He leaned close over the table and told me what the town never admitted out loud. According to him, there was a place the old miners called the Whispering Hollow, a stretch of high-altitude forest off an abandoned trail past Red Mountain Pass. In 1887, the Silverton Standard newspaper published a story about 6 miners who vanished there, leaving behind half-eaten meals in their camp. In the same article, one survivor spoke of hearing his own name whispered from the trees in a voice that sounded exactly like his younger brother's. When he followed the sound, he claimed the air grew colder, the forest silent except for the voice repeating his name. Terrified, he ran back, and by morning everyone else was gone. The paper dismissed it as hysteria caused by altitude sickness, yet the disappearances never stopped. Local records, church notes, town council logs, even a mining company ledger, hinted at dozens of unexplained vanishings between 1887 and 1923, all in or near the hollow. Daniel slid a photocopy across the table of an 1891 coroner's report on a man named Thomas Aiken who had been found near the hollow, his body intact, but his face twisted as if frozen in terror, no sign of injury, no clear cause of death. Daniel told me he had hiked the area himself 2 weeks earlier and swore he heard someone calling his name even though no one else was with him. "It was me," he said quietly, his hand trembling on the glass, my own voice calling from the trees. At first I laughed, thinking he was exaggerating, but the more he spoke, the more I realized he was afraid in a way I had never seen before. Daniel had always been rational, skeptical of ghost stories, yet here he was insisting that the hollow was real and that people still avoided it at all costs. He said locals refused to talk about it, dismissing questions with a quick shake of the head. But he had found fragments of their silence, faded letters in the town archive, an 1897 diary from a preacher's wife who wrote of the woods that spoke in my husband's voice though he had not yet arrived, and an oral account recorded in the 1930s describing echoes of the living that led men to their end. The deeper Daniel dug, the more the pattern emerged, voices imitating those you trust most, luring you away, only for silence to swallow you. Sitting in that dim tavern, I felt a chill even though the stove burned hot behind us. I told him I'd hike the trail with him, just once, to prove it was only his imagination playing tricks. He nodded, but the look in his eyes told me he wasn't seeking proof. He wanted someone to witness it with him. Before we left, he leaned across the table and whispered, "Just remember, if you hear your name, don't answer and don't follow." That warning, spoken so gravely, has never left me. The next morning, October 16th, 2014, The first snow of the season dusted the rooftops of Silverton, and the air carried a crisp bite that made every sound sharper, as if the mountains themselves were listening. Daniel insisted we begin early, though the sun had only just begun to brush the tips of the San Juans with light. We packed lightly, carrying only water, snacks, and a small notebook where Daniel had jotted down every detail he had uncovered. He led me along a narrow trail that branched off the million-dollar highway, one that was overgrown with spruce and fir, so seldom traveled that moss covered the old wooden signpost until it was barely legible. It was there, with the crunch of frost under our boots and the silence of the forest pressing in, that I first felt something stir. The trees grew unnaturally close, their branches forming a canopy that dimmed the light though the morning was bright. The higher we climbed, the more it seemed as if sound itself was fading. Our footfalls dulled, the wind grew absent, even the occasional call of a bird ceased. Daniel told me this was exactly what survivors described, an unnatural quiet that began before the voices. He showed me an old clipping from 1902, folded neatly into his notebook, about a man named Henry Collins who returned from the hollow half-mad, raving about hearing his mother calling him from the woods though she had died years earlier. The article quoted him. She begged me to follow, but when I stepped toward the sound, the forest closed in and I could not breathe. He died 2 days later of heart failure at just 37. As we hiked, Daniel's tone grew hushed, reverent almost, as though speaking too loudly might awaken something. He pointed out a clearing where the stumps of century-old campfires lay blackened and crumbling. He told me miners had once set up watch here, but abandoned the site after 3 of their men vanished on a single night in 1893. No one ever used it again. I knelt, touching the charred wood, and felt an unexpected chill, as if the ground itself retained the memory of those who had disappeared. Hours passed, and the deeper we went, the more disoriented I became. Though I had a compass, the needle seemed to twitch slightly whenever I stopped to check, wavering as though pulled by something unseen. Daniel told me he'd noticed the same before. He said old journals spoke of the mountains confusing the instruments of man, which the miners dismissed as magnetism from hidden or veins. But there was no mining here, not this deep. Around midday, clouds gathered with unnerving speed, swallowing the sun and casting the hollow in an unearthly dimness. We paused to eat, but neither of us had much appetite. Daniel unfolded another photocopy, this one from a diary dated 1897, belonging to a preacher's wife named Elizabeth Moore. She wrote of hearing her husband's voice call from the tree lean while she prepared supper, though he had been in town and would not arrive until the next day. The voice knew the pet name he alone called me, she wrote. Yet when I turned, the woods were still, and I knew if I stepped forward, I would not return. Reading her words, I felt a cold ripple down my spine, not because of the story itself, but because Daniel had already warned me with the same advice she'd written more than a century earlier. Never follow, never answer. As the day wore on, we reached a ridge where the trees opened to reveal a wide view of the valley below. Silverton lay tiny and distant, dwarfed by the jagged ridges surrounding it. I felt a wave of vertigo, a sense that we had crossed some invisible boundary where the world of people no longer applied. Daniel seemed restless, scanning the tree line as though expecting something. Then he froze. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. I strained, but at first all I heard was the rush of my own blood in my ears. Then it came, so faint I thought it was the wind. Yet it carried unmistakable shape. My name, once, twice, stretched thin, as if carried through water. It was my own voice. Every instinct in me screamed to turn and run, but my legs locked. Daniel grabbed my arm hard enough to hurt, shaking his head violently. "Don't answer. Don't move," he hissed. The sound faded as quickly as it had come, leaving the forest silent again, more silent than before. I wanted to believe it was a trick of the mind, an echo distorted by the wind, but the way Daniel's face had drained of color told me he had heard it too. For the rest of the afternoon we walked in silence, the forest around us heavier with every step, until shadows stretched long and we decided to camp on a slope overlooking the hollow itself. As night fell, the air grew so cold our breath hung like smoke, and the silence pressed against us until I thought I might go mad. Lying awake, I kept waiting for the whisper to return, dreading the moment my own voice would call out from the darkness again. The night of October 16th, 2014, is etched in my memory with a clarity so sharp it still wakes me from sleep. The silence around our camp had grown unbearable, a kind of pressure that settled on my chest, making every breath feel too loud. Daniel and I sat by the small fire we had built, but even the crackle of the flames seemed muted, swallowed by the stillness of the hollow. Around midnight, as the fire dwindled to embers, I heard it again, my name, spoken with perfect familiarity in my own voice. This time it came from the slope above, from the black line of trees silhouetted against the faint starlight. My heart pounded, and before I could speak, Daniel pressed a finger to his lips. Then, almost immediately, another voice joined it, his own. Daniel. It called, smooth and coaxing, exactly like him, but with an undertone that chilled me. We sat frozen, staring into the trees, when the voices grew louder, overlapping, calling in unison, not hurried, not threatening, but insistent, intimate, like trusted friends urging us closer. Daniel gripped my wrist so tightly I could feel his nails dig into my skin, his body rigid, his face pale. "This is what happens," he whispered, barely audible. The voices shifted then, changing tone, no longer our own, but those of people we loved. I heard my mother's voice, soft and tender, though she was hundreds of miles away in Denver, calling me the way she used to when I was a child lost in a crowd. Daniel's eyes widened as he heard his younger sister's laughter, a sound he had once told me always comforted him. The voices wove together, rising and falling, coaxing, beckoning, until the forest seemed alive with them. Then came the moment that broke me. I heard Daniel's voice again, but not from the tree-line, from directly behind me, close to my ear, though Daniel sat right across the fire. I spun around, and of course nothing was there, just the dark press of trees. My stomach turned cold. Daniel whispered, "Don't listen. Don't look." But it was already too late. Out of the corner of my vision, I caught movement in the trees, faint pale shapes shifting between the trunks. They were not solid, not figures exactly, but outlines, as if the shadows themselves were taking form. The fire sputtered, casting uneven light, and for the briefest instant, I thought I saw my own face reflected in the dark, a mirror image staring back at me. Panic surged. I grabbed Daniel's arm and insisted we leave, but he shook his head violently. "If we run, it follows," he said. His certainty terrified me more than the voices themselves. The air grew colder, burning my lungs, and the forest hummed with a low vibration I felt in my bones. The voices shifted again, growing harsher, less human, as though the mimicry was faltering, revealing something beneath the surface. They no longer sounded like us or our families, but something raw, distorted, yet still trying to imitate. Daniel stood abruptly, shouting into the darkness, "We're not listening. We're not coming." His voice cracked, carried too far in the silence. Immediately, the forest fell quiet. Utterly, suffocatingly quiet. For a full minute, nothing moved, nothing spoke. Then, from every side at once, a chorus of whispers erupted, layered upon one another, so many voices it was impossible to separate them. They didn't call names anymore. They repeated fragments of sentences, words Daniel had said earlier that day, things I had muttered under my breath, echoes of our own speech twisted and thrown back at us. It felt like being trapped inside a room of mirrors, each reflection warped, each voice wrong. I felt my grip on reality slipping. Daniel seized my arm and hissed, "We have to get out. Now." We doused the fire with snow and stumbled down the slope, our headlamps flickering weakly, the beams swallowed by the oppressive dark. Every step down the trail felt like walking through water, sluggish, heavy, as if the mountain itself resisted our leaving. The whispers followed, not behind us but all around, inside the very air, repeating our words, our names, our laughter, until I could no longer tell if my thoughts were my own. At one point I froze, certain I saw someone standing on the trail ahead, a figure with my own posture, my own outline, motionless. Daniel yanked me sideways, dragging me off the path into the trees. We half ran, half fell down the mountainside, branches tearing at our clothes, the cold burning our skin. The voices grew distant, then suddenly close again, as though the hollow itself shifted space. My legs gave out once, and I fell hard. The wind knocked from me. As I struggled up, I swore I felt a hand brush my shoulder, though Daniel was still 10 feet ahead. Somehow, by sheer desperation, we stumbled back to the faint trace of the old trail. The forest behind us went silent again, too silent, as if watching. We didn't stop until the first hints of dawn touched the peaks, the light breaking the spell of night. Exhausted, shaking, we collapsed near a boulder where the trees thinned. Daniel looked at me with hollow eyes and whispered, "Now you know." When the morning of October 17th, 2014, finally rose over the jagged ridges of the San Juans, the world felt utterly different, as if the night had marked a permanent line between what I had once believed possible and what I could never unsee. Daniel and I stumbled down towards Silverton in near silence, our throats raw, our clothes torn, our faces pale from exhaustion. Every so often I thought I still heard faint echoes trailing behind us, whispers carried in the wind, but Daniel would shake his head sharply, refusing to acknowledge them. By the time we reached Green Street, the town was already awake, shopkeepers sweeping their steps, the smell of coffee drifting from the cafe. Yet when they saw us, covered in dirt and pine needles, their expressions hardened. Not one person asked what had happened, though their eyes betrayed recognition. It was as if they knew exactly where we had been and what we had encountered, but their silence was part of a pact. We went back to Daniel's small rental house, a weather-beaten place at the edge of town, and he locked the door behind us immediately. He poured 2 cups of black coffee with shaking hands, then spread out the papers he had shown me the night before: newspaper clippings, diaries, council records. "It's always the same," he whispered, pointing at the brittle pages. "The voices change, but the story doesn't. People go missing, or they return broken, speaking of themselves in the woods, until their minds unravel." I asked why the town ignored it, why they didn't warn hikers or post signs, but Daniel only gave a hollow laugh. "Because the mountains own this place. Always have. You can't admit something like that and go on living here." Later that day, unable to resist, I went alone to the small Silverton Public Library. In the archive room, where dust lay thick over boxes of forgotten records, I found more than Daniel had even shown me. A 1911 ledger listed 3 young boys who vanished while gathering firewood near the hollow. A 1923 council record mentioned closing certain trails indefinitely for the safety of townsfolk, though no reason was written. And then there was a fragile letter from 1934, written by a schoolteacher named Margaret Hayes, who described walking home after dusk and hearing her father's voice calling to her from the trees. He had died 2 years earlier. She wrote that she ran without looking back and never returned to that part of the forest. Her final line sent a chill through me. "The mountains speak with the voices of the ones we love, but they do not love us back." That night, Daniel and I agreed never to return to the hollow. Yet the experience marked us in ways I cannot fully explain. For weeks afterward, even back in Denver, I would hear faint echoes in quiet moments. My name, a phrase I had spoken, laughter that belonged to no one present. Sometimes I would turn quickly, certain someone was standing behind me, only to find empty space. I tried to convince myself it was trauma, the brain replaying what had happened, but deep down I knew better. Daniel and I stayed in touch for a while, checking in every few days, but by December his emails grew shorter, more distracted. In January 2015, he stopped replying altogether. When I called, his phone was disconnected. I learned from a former classmate that he had moved suddenly, leaving Silverton without a word, his rental house abandoned. No forwarding address, no explanation. It was as if the hollow had finally claimed him, not with disappearance, but with silence. I have never gone back to Silverton, though the urge sometimes gnaws at me when I see the San Juan peaks on a map or in a photograph. I know that if I set foot near that trail again, I might not return. And yet, I also know that what I experienced was real, that the legend of the Whispering Hollow was never just a story miners told to scare each other. The mountains hold something older, something that mimics, something that waits. Sometimes at night, when the wind rattles the windows of my Denver apartment, I think I hear it again, my own voice, low and patient, asking me to come outside. And I remember Daniel's warning, echoing across more than a century of vanished souls. If you hear your name in the mountains, don't answer and don't follow.